Well, folks, there's a rule when it comes to horrific school shootings, mass shootings in the United States, a media rule. And the rule goes like this. If the shooter is a suspected right-winger, then the issue is obviously conservatism, conservative rhetoric, and everything to do with the right wing. If the shooter is somebody who is of the left, then the issue is guns. Always and forever, that is the way that the formula works. And yesterday was no exception. Horrific school shooting against a Catholic church. It was a Catholic school, but the actual shooting happened at the Annunciation Catholic Church in Minneapolis. A gunman, we'll learn more about the gunman in just a moment, killed two young students, elementary school students aged 8 and 10, murdered as they sat in their pews during the Wednesday service. It happened during Mass. The shooter, according to the UK Daily Mail, dressed in all black, armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol, pepper sprayed bullets through the church's stained glass windows as the helpless children, staff, and parents inside rushed for cover. All the guns were used in the attack and purchased legally, police said. 17 people, including 14 children, were injured during the deliberate act of violence, according to Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara. Here is the police chief of Minneapolis describing the situation.
During the Mass, a gunman approached on the side of the building, and began firing a rifle through the church windows towards the children sitting in the pews at the Mass. Shooting through the windows, he struck children and worshipers that were inside the building. The shooter was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. This was a deliberate act of violence against innocent children and other people worshiping. The sheer cruelty and cowardice of firing into a church full of children is absolutely incomprehensible. Police officers from the Minneapolis Police Department immediately responded, entered the church, and attempted to provide first aid and rescue some of the children that were hiding throughout the building, while other first responders came and EMS responded to rush victims to nearby hospitals. 2 young children, ages 8 and 10, were killed where they sat in the pews. Their parents have been notified. 17 other people were injured, 14 of them being children. 2 of those children are in critical condition. The coward who fired these shots ultimately took his own life in the rear of the church.
Well, apparently, the police chief pointed out that all of the guns here were purchased legally. Minneapolis, Minnesota is a very, very gun-controlled area. Minneapolis has gun control laws. Minnesota has gun control laws. Apparently, there were no red flags that were put up by the family, which we'll discuss in a moment, which is totally crazy and awful and indicative of a broader problem in American public life with regard to trans issues, which are at the root of this particular shooting. Here's the police chief explaining that no gun laws were broken here.
As far as the weapons, there were 3 on the scene here. They were lawfully purchased. He had a permit to purchase that was issued in Minnesota recently. I don't have information about where specifically those weapons were purchased, but they were purchased lawfully.
A 10-year-old student who was present at the shooting described the situation. Again, horrific, absolutely textbook definition of a hate crime. If you believe in the concept of hate crimes, this certainly fits the bill. This is the purposeful targeting of Catholic school children. That is horrific as it gets. Vile and evil, of course. For those who believe evil doesn't exist, this is what evil looks like. Here's a 10-year-old child explaining what he went through.
My friend ran, someone helped him run out. He saw him, he was wearing all black and he had a ski mask on. I was down, so I didn't really look up. He got shot through the stained glass windows, so they're probably ruined. And then my friend Victor, he was laying on top of me, making sure I was safe, and he got hit. So that was really brave of him.
And you have a nick on your neck?
Yeah, I don't even know what it's from. Kind of looks like debris or something.
And obviously, kids should not have to go through anything like this. And the shooter, tremendous agent of evil, Kash Patel, head of the FBI, who put out a statement that this will be investigated as a hate crime, as well it should be. He said the FBI is investigating the shooting as an act of domestic terrorism and hate crime targeting Catholics. There were 2 fatalities, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. In addition, 14 children and 3 adults were injured. Now, we have a policy on the show. I don't mention the names of mass shooters. One of the reasons I don't mention the names of mass shooters on the show is because, as we will see with regard to this mass shooters take inspiration from one another. They look for publicity. And my idea anyway, and the social science tends to support this, is if you deprive mass shooters of notoriety, if you deprive them of name recognition, then it doesn't spawn as many mass shooters in the future. That at least is the hope. It's a small thing that we can do on the show. I will say that we'll use the first name of the shooter here because it's important to the story. The first name of the shooter is purportedly Robin. Can we say Robin? I say purportedly because the shooter's original name was not Robin. The shooter's original name was Robert. This is important to the story because, as we'll see, this person was a trans radical who believed, as deeply as it is possible to believe, in what can best be termed the OMNICAUSE, the gigantic aggregation of radical left-wing beliefs that if you buy into one, you have to buy into all. And when you look at the evidence from the crime, if you look at the actual guns used in the crime, which had etched into them or painted on them slogans, left-wing radical slogans, if you look at the shooter's diaries, documents left behind, videos, what you will see is a massive number of left-wing propagandistic slogans, which we'll get into in a moment because it does speak to the radicalization that happens online. It speaks to the fact that people who are emotionally disturbed buy into a broader worldview that promotes violence. It does. That suggests that you are living in a world where you have no control, where shadowy forces control everything about you, about your life. And this means that out of despair and enervation, you're going to go commit horrific acts of violence. That pattern, you see it repeated across school shooters. Doesn't have to be trans particularly. In this case, it was. But you see across school shooters deep embeddedness in conspiracy theories about the world, a belief that they themselves are wronged by the world, that the world has done some wrong to them, and they are going to take it out on the world, on the most innocent, in order to gain attention for their particular agenda. And the left-wing OMNICAUSE is dangerous. It is a dangerous philosophical belief. Not because it's going to result in shootings alone, although on the fringes, on the margins, it will, but because it is a wrong, evil belief system, truly bad. So, who was the shooter? According to the New York Post, this person was formerly known as Robert and now called himself Robin. He opened fire through the stained glass windows of the church, as we mentioned. Just hours before the cowardly massacre, the shooter, 23, posted a series of twisted videos on YouTube, which included a manifesto. In one 20-minute video, the shooter flips through the disturbing handwritten manifesto. Much of it is written in a homespun code that uses Cyrillic characters and English phonetic words. In the deranged writings, he gleefully fantasizes about being that scary, horrible monster standing over those powerless kids and reverently confesses admiration for the 2012 Sandy Hook massacre. And again, there are many shooters that are mentioned by this shooter in his manifesto, in his videos, again, painted on the guns themselves, which is the reason I'm not mentioning the full name of the shooter. The shooter applied to change his birth name from Robert to Robin in Dakota County, Minnesota, when he was 17 years old, according to the court documents. That name change was granted in January 2020. The application, by the way, happened when he was a minor, which means that his parents had to sign off on it. The petition added that the shooter, quote, identifies as a female and wants her name to reflect that identification. A perverse ideology that masks true mental illness as simply a result of society's intolerance promotes serious, depressive, violent mental illness. Ignoring mental illness does not make it go away. Pretending that mental illness is something else, that it's merely a rebellion against the strictures of a conservative and patriarchal society, that's a lie, and it promotes mental illness, and yes, violent mental illness. Apparently, in his diary, he wrote, I don't want to dress girly all the time, but I guess I sometimes really like it. I know I'm not a woman, but I definitely don't feel like a man. I really like my outfit. I look pretty smart and modest. I think I want to wear something like this for my shooting. He also goes into great detail about his decision to target Annunciation, where he graduated from grade school in 2017. His mom worked as a secretary at the school until retiring in 2021. Another page of his diary said, "I'm feeling good about Annunciation. It seems like a good combo of easy attack form and devastating tragedy, and I want to do more research. I have concerns about finding a large enough group. I want to avoid any parents, but pre- and post-school drop-off. Maybe I could attack an event at the on-site church. I think attacking a large group of kids coming in from recess is my best plan. Then from there, I can go inside and kill, going for as long as I can." And then in the video, he flicks through a number of blank pages in this diary before reaching what appears to be a drawing showing the inside of a church. And he takes out a knife and stabs into the center of the sketch. So again, person obviously mentally ill, obviously with horrific satanic thoughts. And here is where we get into the politics of the shooter. So first off, when it comes to the politics of the shooter, we should point out this is a trans radical, clearly. And this is relevant to the story. Now, there are stereotypes that we jump to when it comes to mass shootings. If there's a shooting at a synagogue, the immediate mental jump, for good reason, is either Muslim radical or white supremacist. Because historically speaking, those are the kinds of people who shoot up a synagogue. If there's a shooting at a Catholic church, the immediate jump now is either to Muslim radical or to trans radical. Why? Because why else would a Catholic site be targeted? And there's a reason for that. The list of violent incidents that now indicate trans suspects or self-identified trans suspects include the Covenant School shooting in Nashville, where again, the police tried to cover this up for literally years. We knew right away what the likely rationale for the shooting was. But because the media did not want that to fall on the radical trans agenda that suggests, of course, that religious institutions are brutal and evil to trans people, trying to quote unquote erase them, which is the equivalent to killing them. Because the media did not want to open that can of worms, they decided that they were simply going to cover it up for years, but that was, in fact, a trans radical driven crime. There was the STEM School Highlands Ranch shooting in California. A story that was largely buried is that the suspect who is targeting Brett Kavanaugh identified online as a trans gamer girl. There was the controversial Club Q shooting in Colorado, where the suspect who may have been trolling claimed to be non-binary. Unclear exactly what the case was with that suspect. There's an attempted school shooting in Maryland, in which the alleged suspect was identifying in this way. There's a burning of a Tesla in Michigan, a Tesla shop. There's an attempted knife attack on an ICE facility in Portland. So obviously the media have no problem trying to identify right-wing trends in crime. When the ideology is on the other foot, then they run screaming away from it. Because the biggest thing that we have been told here, the most important thing that we have been told here, is that this must not redound to the detriment of trans ideology, which is a delusional ideology. Men cannot become women. It is backed by zero science, as we've been revealing about the American Medical Association and its head, Dr. Bobby McCamala, the fake science that is being used to trot out the lie that you're supposed to hormonally treat young people who are struggling with gender or struggling with depression and suicidal ideation. That is a lie, and it has consequences. And it certainly has consequences when your claim is, as the claim of the trans radical left is, and much of the mainstream left, that denying that a man can become a woman is a form of death. It's a form of erasure. That you are, in fact, removing someone's identity. That it's a form of soul killing is essentially the claim. And then you can't be particularly surprised when that rhetoric gets very violent very quickly. In fact, here is a picture of the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan, just a few months ago, wearing a shirt that says, "Protect trans kids," with a picture of a knife on it. Again, the idea being that violence is necessary in order to, quote unquote, protect the trans kids. Meanwhile, Minnesota, of course, has been one of the states at the forefront of the idea that, quote unquote, trans kids who are having problems and who are then lied to and told they can move to the other gender through gender transition, through hormones and surgeries, that they must be protected from their own parents, from their church communities, from the despicable bigotry of people who still believe in reality. Minnesota has been at the forefront of this. Just last year, here was Governor Tim Walz with a bunch of trans kids and trans activists, in which Walz is talking about making Minnesota a quote-unquote trans refuge.
As you can see, we have a wonderful group here again today. And the purpose of being here is we've been signing a lot of bills. We've been welcoming our neighbors back into their communities by making sure we're restoring voting rights to folks. We're making sure that our neighbors can drive to their kids' soccer games. We're making moves as we talk about the state budget simultaneously, making sure that when we've talked about One Minnesota, we mean every single person to feel valued, loved, seen, heard, and respected in the state of Minnesota. I cannot imagine the stress that families and individuals go through. But here in Minnesota, we're going to be a place of refuge to make sure that they feel safe and welcome. And I don't know what a group of people in Pierre who decide to make life miserable and more dangerous for people are thinking, but it's not going to happen in Minnesota.
Okay, again, that man was the vice presidential candidate for the presidency of the United States on the Democratic ticket. Back in March, Jacob Frey, who is the bizarre, nutty, and apparently for Minneapolis, not enough radical mayor of Minneapolis, he was touting Minneapolis as a safe haven for the trans community, standing alongside supposedly religious Muslim Ilhan Omar, talking about how it was a safe haven for the trans community, Minneapolis. This is March.
I want all of you just to know exactly where we are as far as our neighbors go. Minneapolis will continue to be a safe haven for undocumented immigrants, for our trans community. Regardless of who you are or where you come from, Minneapolis is a place where you should be proud to call home.
Okay, well, Jacob Frey, the awful mayor of Minneapolis, yesterday, he made sure that his priorities were straight. A bunch of Catholic school kids get murdered and or shot, wounded, by a trans person. And his first priority is to make sure that the trans community is okay. I mean, this is all just the Norm Macdonald joke over and over. You know, the old joke that he said on Twitter, what terrifies me is if ISIS were to detonate a nuclear device and kill 50 million Americans, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims. That's where we are each and every day. If you're a member of what Democrats deem to be a victim group, it doesn't matter. If a member of your group or even the ideology that drives that group is radical, you must be protected.
I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. We should not be operating out of a place of hate for anyone. We should be operating from a place of love for our kids. Kids died today. This needs to be about them.
Well, again, you might want to discuss that those were Catholic kids who were murdered for being Catholic by a trans radical. Why is that important? Well, the reason that that's important is because the ideology that lies behind trans, again, is an inherently violent ideology. It says that if you refuse to acknowledge, you personally refuse to acknowledge that a man can become a woman, you have engaged in an act of violence. This is the language that is routinely used by the trans radical community and now the Democratic Party entirely. And you know what it leads to? It leads to parents signing off on the transing of their children. As we said, this particular shooter, he was a minor when he tried to change his name. His parents had to sign off on that. You know why? Because when you spread the propaganda that hormone replacement therapy and surgeries are going to make your depressive, suicidal, ideated kid into a wonderful member of the opposite gender, you are not helping your child. You are harming your child. Beyond that, this violent ideology, and again, if you claim that people who oppose your ideology are trying to kill you, that really leaves you very few responses. And on the margins, again, I'm not saying that everyone trans is going to become a murderer, God forbid, or that everybody who is promoting trans ideology is spurring people to murder. But as always, when it comes to the connection between rhetoric and ideology and actual action, if you keep raising the temperature on that boiling pot of water, then you are going to get it bubbling over. This is a thing that is true all the way across the board, always and forever. It manifests in trans radical groups, like the so-called Zizians that Andy No has been reporting on. He calls them Trantifa sometimes. That is the name given to a former Bay Area trans death cult linked to 8 brutal homicides and suicides. Its members followed a radical anarchist and woke-tinged ideology that claimed transphobes were targeting them. As a result, they stockpiled weapons and lived in box trucks, and then a lot of people died. The liberal media have mostly ignored the story. This is right. Again, you can imagine if the shoe were on the other foot, if, God forbid, a mosque had been targeted and had been white supremacists doing the shooting, it would be all about the broader right-wing ideology with regard to Islam. Every politician would be responsible. When it comes to this, the goal of the left is to direct away from the OMNICAUSE. The OMNICAUSE they spend so much time defending. Jen Psaki over on MSNBC, she claims that people on the right are weaponizing the shooter's identity to distract us. Distract us from what? Your latest call for gun control? It seems like more of a distraction to completely ignore the actual shooter.
But this is the only country where shootings like this one happen this often. The United States not only has the highest rate of gun violence of any country in the world, it's become a leading cause of death for young people and teenagers in this country. That should make everybody angry. Weaponizing the shooter's identity is meant to distract from what matters. That is what they are doing, trying to distract from what matters. Here's what matters. Today's shooter bought the rifle, handgun, and shotgun they used to do what they did today legally. We live in a country with more guns than people, where there are not universal background checks, there are not bans on assault weapons, and it is far too easy to buy a gun. It's the guns, everyone. It's not really a secret.
Actually, it is not the guns. We'll get to the gun control idea here in a moment, but it is, again, incredible that what you want to do is avoid the actual identity of the shooter, the rationale the shooter used, because it is politically inconvenient. And now, across the board, mental illness here tends to be the problem when it comes to school shootings. Yes, there are causes that tend to associate themselves with mental illness. That is particularly true in a very online era. And one of those big causes is, as I've said, the OMNICAUSE. And it's all over this shooter's guns. All over this shooter's guns. Mentally ill people can now find people that are similarly extreme and mentally ill online. They unite with them. They find solidarity with those people. They spiral into further and further rabbit holes. And sometimes it manifests in violence. And a social media ecosystem that forwards this stuff, that gets you clicks and likes for it, is truly awful. It is a bad social media ecosystem. And you can see all the rabbit holes that this perverse mind, this sick mind, went down on the guns. So, for example, here are some of the pictures from the guns. Quote, "Kill Donald Trump." Okay, that's written on the gun. Now, amazingly, some of the reporters said that Donald Trump's name was on the gun without mentioning that the shooter actually had written "Kill Donald Trump" on the gun, like wanted to assassinate Donald Trump. And then there are the anti-Semitic messages that were on the gun. Actually, this particular shooter said that he'd be interested in shooting Jews, but it seemed like it'd be easier to shoot Catholics. He wrote on the guns, "Israel must fall." He wrote "Burn Israel" on the guns. And then he wrote, just for good measure, 6 million wasn't enough, meaning that the Holocaust was not enough. Okay, so those are all parts of the extreme OMNICAUSE. The Jews are the problem. Israel is the problem. Kill President Trump. A sticker in his journal carried the Pride Progress flag and said, "Defend equality," with an actual gun over the Pride Progress flag, which is exactly what happened here. Apparently, the trans Minneapolis terrorist mused about targeting Elon Musk, and Trump, and Jews, but decided targeting children would bring him the most joy. He said, quote, "For good would be a target or political of societal significance. Targets like Musk, Trump, or some significant exec. I can't really put my finger on a specific purpose. It definitely won't be for racism or white supremacy. Well, I don't really like being around people of color. I don't give enough of a shit about them to take my life for them," he wrote. Well, truly a good radical, white, left-wing, insane person. This is the OMNICAUSE. Right? If you take away the murder, then what you get is hatred of Catholics, hatred of Jews, hatred of Trump, LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign radicalism. These are the causes that this person believed in. And that OMNICAUSE, when it meets with mental illness, is used as an excuse for murder. Because the radicalization of mentally ill people is not all that difficult, unfortunately, in a society in which, again, you can find this material online everywhere and forever. And ignoring that, ignoring the increasing isolation of young people, the treatment of certain forms of mental illness as a badge of honor. If you're mentally ill, you ought to get treatment. You ought not be treated as a societal hero who is somehow standing up to the evils of a traditionally conservative society. The politics does have something to do with the shooting here, and pretending otherwise is a lie. And meanwhile, Democrats jumped to do the stupidest possible thing here, which is to rip on thoughts and prayers, which, again, as a religious person, prayer is not designed to make God come down and stop school shootings. That is not what prayer does. No one religious believes that when you pray, that God is somehow going to stop evil people from doing evil things. That is not what prayer is for. But because Democrats believe that government is God, they believe that when people pray, what they mean is that they don't want government to do anything, or they really should be directing their prayers at government where they can get a response or whatever. And so they end up in the bizarre position after a murder during mass of saying that thoughts and prayers are useless, which, again, incredible. Thoughts and prayers, particularly prayers, are meant to uplift the hearts of the people who are suffering. It is meant to give parents who are suffering the understanding that other human beings are with them and care about them, and that they're part of a broader whole, and that God cares about them even in their pain. That is the meaning of what prayer is about in these situations. But instead, what we get is a bunch of lectures about how prayer is useless from Jacob Fry, who's busily defending the feelings of the trans community after a trans shooter murders Catholic school kids. Here's Jacob Fry going after thoughts and prayers.
These were Minneapolis families. These were American families. And the amount of pain that they are suffering right now is extraordinary. And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church.
Okay, I promise you, if this had been a shooting at a mosque, he would not be out there ripping thoughts and prayers, particularly from Muslims. I mean, remember, this is the same Jacob Fry who was kneeling and supposedly emotional at the casket of George Floyd.
Joy comes in the morning. Troubles, they don't last always.
I mean, that looks like some thoughts and prayers happening right there. No? And meanwhile, Jen Psaki over on MSNBC, she tweeted out that, and again, this has become sort of the rote, repeated slogan. Prayer is not freaking enough. Prayers does not end school shootings. Prayers do not make parents feel safe sending their kids to school. Prayer does not bring these kids back. Enough with the thoughts and prayers. That is not what prayer is meant to do. That is not what prayer is meant to do. Nobody is suggesting that's what it's meant. But by the way, she knows that. Back in 2017, after the congressional baseball shooting, she tweeted out thoughts and prayers with Steve Scalise, an officer shot, and thanking Members Hill staffers for your public service. Jen Psaki then went on MSNBC and repeated the point.
Sorry, this is a tough one. Having your child killed while they are sitting in a pew for a morning prayer service is not what any parent should have to worry about. And I have felt a mixture of anger and a lot of anger and emotional exhaustion about this today, as I'm sure many of you have, because we have been here so many times. And yet again, like clockwork, half of the politicians in our country have little more to offer than thoughts and prayers. That is all they are offering. Join all of us in praying for the victims, was Vice President J.D. Vance's response today. That's what he said. That's it. Please join me in praying for everyone involved, Trump wrote. We have seen this play out over and over again. There is a shooting, then come the thoughts and prayers, and then comes the attempt to shift the focus. This is what always happens.
To shift the focus to what? Okay, let's talk about some of the solutions. So first of all, this is the game that Democrats like to play. It's the do something game. Shouting at the wind, do something. And then they recommend invariably some sort of quote unquote solution that doesn't even remotely solve the problem. So they'll do something like claim that if we have an assault weapons ban, that will stop school shootings. It will not. They claim that if you, the law-abiding gun owner, are removed of your Second Amendment rights, then magically school shootings will be stopped. That of course, is untrue. And then they reject actual, real solutions. I've been saying for literally years that we should protect our kids the way that we protect our banks. It is an unfortunate reality that there are evil people who target children. This is why Jewish day schools, which have been long targeted for literally decades by people who don't like Jews, this is why security at Jewish day schools is a massive cost, a huge, huge cost. Multiple security guards all around campus, gates and fences and cameras and armed security guards. If that's what it takes to protect kids, then that's what we should have. And magical thinking about snapping your fingers and all the guns disappearing is not a solution. It's not even remotely a solution. But again, the goal for Democrats is to posture on the basis of this. That's what Gavin Newsom in California is doing. He tweeted out that this is sick. He said, we cannot even make it through the first week of school without mass shootings, and the GOP will continue to do absolutely nothing while our kids are being gunned down. This is sick. And then you have Ilhan Omar, who, again, but all these people are proponents of the OMNICAUSE in broad, saying the same thing on MSNBC.
You know, in Minnesota, we have strong gun laws, but Indiana is not that far away from us. And so we have to recognize as, you know, people who live in the United States, you know, a community like Minneapolis or just the state of Minnesota taking action does not prevent our neighbor from coming and harming one of our community members. And so we have to collectively think of ourselves as people who collectively reside in this country, who are impacted by the decisions that are, the lack of decisions or decisions that are made in different states, because we are in one country, and so there has to be federal laws that are introduced that safeguard life in this country. You know, Simone said something earlier that sits with me forever, which is, you know, we have this problem uniquely as a country, because the rest of the world, once they saw there might be a problem, once they got their first taste of that heartbreak of losing their children in a senseless way, they said no more, not again.
Okay, except for the fact that none of what she's saying is true. First of all, in this particular case, this evil person obtained the guns legally, which we'll get to in just a moment. And beyond that, again, this idea that mass shootings are unique to the United States is not true. John Lott has done excellent work on this over the Crime Prevention Research Center, showing the United States trails a lot of other advanced nations, actually, in mass shooting frequency and death rate, ranging from Norway to Serbia to France to Macedonia to Albania to Slovakia to Switzerland to Finland to Belgium. There are a bunch of places that have mass shootings. And again, mass shootings are actually not a very good proxy for crime in general, because you are picking a subset of shootings. And again, the kinds of shootings the left does not want to talk about are the ones happening in Washington, D.C. every weekend when the National Guard isn't there, or in Chicago. Okay, but here would be some actual solutions. One of those solutions might have been elevated security at religious schools, particularly in the aftermath of the Covenant School shooting in Nashville. Let's say, for example, that state legislators in Minnesota had gone to Governor Tim Walz at that time and said, you know what we need? Extra security at our Catholic schools. And Tim Walz had done nothing. That's precisely what happened. According to the Daily Wire, 2 years before a shooter opened fire on students attending daily mass in Minneapolis, the leaders of independent and Catholic schools in Minnesota begged Democrat Governor Tim Walz for help securing their schools. According to a 2023 letter reviewed by the Daily Wire, the funding was never authorized. In a letter dated April 14th, 2023, that specifically addressed school safety in non-public schools, Tim Benz, president of Mindependent, and Jason Adkins, executive director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, stressed an urgent and critical need in Minnesota to make sure our schools are secure and safe in light of recent and continuing attacks on our schools in this country and in our state. The letter tried to get security on behalf of not just Catholic schools, but independent Jewish, Christian, and Muslim non-public schools within the state of Minnesota. They wrote in their letter, the latest school shooting at a non-public Christian school in Tennessee sadly confirms what we already know. Our schools are under attack. In Minnesota, non-public schools, particularly our Jewish and Muslim schools, have experienced increased levels of threats, all of which we must take very seriously. The tragedy from last week at Covenant School shows we must never allow to happen again what happened there in Minnesota or in our country. We need to ensure that all our schools have the resources to respond to and prevent those attacks from happening in our schools. And they asked for the Minnesota legislature to enact his budget recommendation of $50 million to establish the Building and Cybersecurity Grant Program, and that it include eligible funding for charter schools and non-public schools. No additional security was ever funded, even though the money had already been allocated, apparently. But Minnesota was very focused on making itself a transgender sanctuary state with presumably state funding for the transing of the children. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, how many times have you told somebody, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? That can be good advice sometimes, but not so much for your cell phone, because if you have a cell phone, battery life fades, the processor starts being slow, you've dropped it, run over it with the car. Fortunately, thanks to Pure Talk, your cell phone is something you can replace without feeling guilty. When you switch to Pure Talk this month, they're going to give you a Samsung Galaxy A36 for free with a $35 qualifying plan. Just $35 a month for talk, text, data, and a free Samsung phone with scratch-resistant Gorilla Glass and a battery that lasts all day long, all on America's most dependable 5G network. We use it here in the office. I use Pure Talk. I use it for my calls, when I'm calling my wife, when I'm calling business partners. Yeah, again, my calls are very important to me. I know your calls are important to you. Pure Talk is going to get it done for you and at a lower price. You win by cutting your cell phone bill in half. They win by hiring more Americans and helping more veterans. Make the switch in as little as 10 minutes. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Get your free phone today. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro. Switch to my wireless company, America's wireless company, Pure Talk. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro. Also, when I'm on the road, I just don't sleep as well as I do when I'm at home. A lot of reasons for that. I miss my wife, miss my kids, obviously, but maybe the biggest reason is I miss my mattress, because I have a mattress made just for me by Helix Sleep. When I'm on the road, it's just a mattress that's at the hotel. Helix Sleep. Again, this is a personalized mattress. I can fall asleep in minutes, even when I'm stressed out when I'm at home. They match you with the perfect mattress for your body and sleep style. Whether you're a side sleeper, back sleeper, somewhere in between, they've got you covered. They make it so simple to get your best night's sleep every single night. All you have to do is take their sleep quiz, get matched with a custom mattress based on your body type and sleep preferences. Trust me, when you find that right match, you'll wonder how you ever slept on anything else. I've got that firm but breathable mattress, as I've told you about, and you get literally everything in your life personalized. Why not the thing that you're spending 8 hours a night sleeping on? Right now, Helix is offering an incredible Labor Day early access sale. Visit helixsleep.com/Ben. Get 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. That helps us and it helps them as well. Again, just visit helixsleep.com/Ben for this exclusive offer. And joining us online is our White House correspondent, Mary Margaret Olahan, who broke that story about Minnesota and the request to Governor Tim Walz for more security funding for private schools. Mary, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Ben, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you obviously broke this story over at Daily Wire. It is kind of a shocking story, particularly to me. Obviously we spend an enormous amount of money on our personal security, but pretty much every Jewish day school in America has really, really high security, specifically because of safety threats. And people like me, and I think many people who send their kids to private school, have been advocating for years that the state needs to be helping to protect kids, if this is a priority, by providing further funding to private schools. Apparently, they're trying to do this in Minnesota, and it didn't happen. Why?
Well, Ben, that's a really good question, because this letter that we broke yesterday was sent to Tim Walz only a week after the Covenant Christian School shooting, where a trans-identifying shooter targeted kids in a very similar fashion because they were Christian at this school in Nashville. And so these leaders sent this letter begging Tim Walz for help on these security measures, expressing a critical need for security. And they talked about how Jewish schools need this as well, Muslim schools, independent schools, basically non-public schools. And I spoke to these leaders that sent the letter. I got in touch with both of them yesterday, and they both told me the same thing, that they met with Tim Walz, that they expressed the need for these very serious safety measures, and ultimately they didn't get them. And now I also talked to Tim Walz's team yesterday, because of course we reached out to him, and we received a very confusing and rather evasive statement from them in which they suggested that private schools do receive funding, even though they didn't specify what kind of funding and whether it was the funding that these schools had asked for. And the reason for that is because these schools didn't get what they asked for, these security measures, and Tim Walz's office doesn't want to admit that. So this is a very serious concern, Ben. Obviously, this was an atrocity that took place yesterday, a tragedy. We see these children talking to the news about seeing their friends cover them with their bodies and having to undergo this absolute tragedy. It's just so heartbreaking. And so we should have at every level state lawmakers, nationwide lawmakers who are interested in protecting our kids, especially our kids who are being targeted for religious reasons, who are under such fire lately, as we know.
So Kash Patel over at the FBI, Mary Margaret, has already announced that he's going to be investigating this as a hate crime. Obviously, we have seen an enormous number of crimes committed against Christian sites, Catholic sites in particular, over the course of the last several years. The federal government has, in some ways, seemed to look the other way. That particularly is true when it comes to attacks on pro-life centers, which have become shockingly common, actually, in the United States. What is the White House saying about the fact that the attack wasn't just by a trans-identifying shooter? It was obviously a trans-identifying shooter who was attacking a Catholic school for a reason.
Well, Ben, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because this is something that no one ever talks about, as these hundreds of attacks on Catholic churches around the country that started with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, or actually it started with the leak of the draft opinion showing that Roe v. Wade would soon be overturned. Catholic Vote has a really interesting tracker map that shows that I believe over 200 Catholic churches have been attacked and vandalized since that leak of the draft letter. And this is just, one portion of the attacks on religious institutions around our country. But Catholics and Christians obviously have been attacked for many years, specifically for their faith. It's something that a lot of people on the left don't seem to be interested in talking about. I mean, there's a long, long history of Catholics especially being attacked for their faith. And so in this instance, Kash Patel said yesterday that they're investigating this as a hate crime against Catholics. And what I found really interesting, Ben, as we were watching these press conferences yesterday, reporters were asking the chief of police in Minneapolis whether this was being investigated as a hate crime against Catholics. I think there's some funny business going on at the local level, because he was very careful about what he had to say. He suggested that they don't have any kind of motive yet, even though we do have this journal that the trans-identifying shooter was using to record his manifesto in it. We know that that was his journal, and that all of these crazy, sick rantings in it against Jews, against Christians, against people of faith, all of this was included in this journal, and the chief of police admitted that it was his journal. So there's some interesting dynamics at the local level, but I'm interested in talking to the White House more about this and learning what they think about this atrocity and the way it's being handled at the local level. And we know J.D. Vance has put out a number of statements this morning talking about the importance of prayer and criticizing people like former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who has been demonizing prayer for some reason in the wake of this atrocity. She's been speaking out against supposedly thoughts and prayers in the wake of this horrific shooting of children who were literally killed while they were praying. And so that has been a very strange narrative that we've seen in the last couple days. And I've seen J.D. Vance speak out against this, as well as a number of high-profile Trump-related officials. And, of course, we've seen people like Kristi Noem talk about how the shooter himself identified as a transgender woman, and how this is not the first crime we've seen of this sort, and action needs to be taken. So I, for one, would like to see, I would like to learn, and I will be looking into who this guy's doctor and therapist were. We know that his mother signed off on his gender transition, or at least his legal gender transition. We have those court documents showing that. So I'd like to do a deeper dive into who are the people that were helping propel this young man down this path that resulted in this horrific atrocity yesterday. And we'll keep you posted on what we find.
That's Mary Margaret Olohan doing tremendous reporting, not just at the White House, but also on topics myriad and sundry over at Daily Wire. Mary Margaret, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks, Ben.
Or how about this? How about if you're going to do mental health screening for being able to obtain, for example, a gun license in the state of Minneapolis, in Minnesota? What if, I know this is crazy, what if transgenderism, which is a mental disorder, gender identity disorder is a mental disorder. Anybody who is lying to you and telling you that gender identity disorder is actually a form, again, of rebellion against a cruel and malicious society, they are lying to you. The AMA is lying to you. The APA is lying to you, if that is what they're saying. Why you are supposed to treat somebody who has manic depression differently from somebody who is suffering from transgender confusion and gender identity disorder, which again is highly correlative with depression and suicidal ideation, why that person should not be screened in a special way for a gun permit if you are into gun permits and you believe that we should attempt to stop mentally ill people from getting guns. Why should this be the exception? The only reason to make this an exception is a political reason. That is the only reason whatsoever. There are red flag laws in the state of Minnesota. The parents didn't have a red flag. But you know it would have been an immediate red flag. How about an application to change your gender from male to female? That should be a red flag in the same way that you being involuntarily committed for schizophrenia or a wide variety of mental conditions ought to be a red flag. Obviously. The notion that it's not is bizarre. If you're going to use red flag law, should they not actually flag these things? And by the way, the parents knew there was something wrong. The parents knew there was something wrong. And yet they signed on at the age of 17 to a gender transition for a person who clearly was suffering mentally. Evil and mental illness are not mutually exclusive, but to pretend that mental illness wasn't a causative factor here is idiotic. Of course it was. We have loosened our mental health laws. We have loosened the capacity to involuntarily commit. We have treated mental illness as normality in America. We have allowed mental illness to flourish by politicizing mental illness and saying that certain types of behavior, if they are politically correct mental illnesses, are no longer mental illnesses at all, but signs of mental health and healthy rebellion against an evil, normative society. And the results are clear to a lot of people. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, have you ever wondered why elite athletes, business moguls, high performers are using Armra colostrum? Well, it's because Armra colostrum packs over 400 natural nutrients that work at the cellular level to build muscle, speed recovery, and boost performance. No artificial stuff, just pure fuel for whatever it is you're tackling. Think of it as your body's natural defense system upgrade. It strengthens your immune barriers throughout your entire body while supporting your gut wall system for better digestion and less bloating. Plus, it helps your body absorb nutrients more effectively and keeps your metabolism running smoothly. You'll also notice the difference in your skin's radiance thanks to natural antioxidants and collagen-boosting compounds. Plus, there's a reason elite athletes have been using colostrum for years. It enhances endurance and speeds up recovery so you can bounce back faster. The bottom line, Armra colostrum gives your body comprehensive support to thrive naturally. We've worked out a special offer for my audience. Receive 30% off your first subscription order. Go to armra.com/Shapiro or enter Shapiro to get 30% off your first subscription order. That's armra.com/Shapiro, armra.com/Shapiro. Also, when we started Daily Wire, we did it to bring truth to America without that left-wing bent. Then, after Harry's pulled their advertising from us for saying that boys are boys, girls are girls, we launched Jeremy's Razors to be the sole company in the industry to deliver a great shave that isn't afraid of biological reality. Right now, you can try Jeremy's Razors for just $7.99. Barber-grade blades, moisturizing aloe strip, a weighted handle, and a damned good shave. Only $7.99. It's our lowest price ever. Join the hundreds of thousands of Daily Wire listeners who use Jeremy's Razors. Go to jeremy'srazors.com/Ben today. Join the fight for sanity. I'm going to show you this razor because it actually is quite a very, very nice razor. You're not just standing up to the woke. You're actually getting a really good shave with this excellent razor. I'm telling you, it's really, really good. Go check it out right now. jeremy'srazors.com/Ben. Well, speaking of trans ideology and the insanity of the medical left, and again, this is something we've been covering for the last couple of days without reference to this shooting, the AMA cramming down this insane trans agenda without any reference to actual serious medicine. Well, yesterday, a longtime public health professional, according to Them magazine, Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, announced on social media Wednesday night he had resigned from his post as director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the CDC. He was one of 3 top officials to do so following the news that CDC Director Susan Moneras had been removed from the agency, according to The Hill. Now, we'll get to Moneras in a second, but when it comes to Dr. Dimitri, as he goes by on X, this is the weirdo who was pushing Mpox as opposed to monkeypox because he said that it was somehow going to harm the reputations of gay people if it turned out that it was mainly men having sex with other men who were promoting monkeypox. You remember him? He's the one who took a picture, a very bizarre picture of himself, shirt unbuttoned to show his tattoos. He's a strange person, this person. So he wrote a letter talking about why he resigned. And don't let the door hit you on the way out, bud. Quote, I am writing to formally resign from my position as director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the CDC. Effective August 28th, 2025, close of business. The decision has not come easily, as I deeply value the work the CDC does in safeguarding public health, and I'm proud of my contributions to that critical mission. However, after much contemplation and reflection on recent developments and perspectives brought to light by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I find that the views he and his staff have shared challenge my ability to continue in my current role at the agency and in the service of the health of the American people. Enough is enough. Okay, and then he spells out a bunch of problems that he has with regard to the childhood immunization schedule. And again, some of that stuff is very controversial. I mean, what RFK Jr. is doing with regard to vaccination, some of it is salutary, some of it not so salutary. Many of the comments he makes on vaccination and autism are not grounded in actual data. However, when it comes to this Dr. Dimitri character, we have some other issues, for example. So he suggests, quote, the recent shooting at CDC is not why I'm resigning. My grandfather, who I'm named after, stood up to fascist forces in Greece and lost his life doing so. I'm resigning to make him and his legacy proud. He's standing up to fascism, you see. I'm resigning because of the cowardice of a leader that cannot admit that his and his minions' words over decades created an environment where violence like this can occur. I reject his and his colleagues' thoughts and prayers and advise they direct those to people they have not actively harmed. For decades, I've been a trusted voice for the LGBTQ plus divided by sign community when it comes to critical health topics. I must also cite the recklessness of the administration in their efforts to erase transgender populations, cease critical domestic and international HIV programming, and terminate key research to support equity as part of my decision. And if you wonder how we ended up treating mental illness as normality and normality as mental illness in the United States, this would be the reason here. This sort of take on medicine. That the big problem in medicine and medical institutions is that they are not doing trans propaganda work. Erase transgender populations. This is in the name of medicine, this person is saying this. Not in the name of politics, in the name of medicine. And then you wonder why people don't trust medicine anymore. Want to know why people are losing trust in the AMA? By the way, I know so many doctors. I walk in circles with a lot of doctors. And the number of doctors who think that the AMA has basically turned into a left-wing propaganda organization, for all intents and purposes, is very high. Terminate key research to support equity? What is the research to support equity that is medically based? So this Dr. Dimitri character says, public health is not merely about the health of the individual, but it is about the health of the community, the nation, and the world. And he signed the letter, Dimitri C. Daskalakis, MD, MPH, he, his, him. Well, bye. Now, the problem, of course, in American politics is that everything is unbelievably reactionary. This isn't just true in America. It's true literally everywhere. Something will go wrong on one side, the other side will react, and the pendulum will swing so far in the other direction that you end up with some not great things happening on the other side. Well, some of that is happening inside HHS. So, again, I like Bobby Kennedy. I on a personal level, I think that Bobby Kennedy he seems to be an honest and kind human being. I think many of his ideas on medicine are not correct, are just simply not right. And this is manifesting itself in some strange ways. He made a comment yesterday that at the very least is somewhat troubling because it seems a little bit woo-woo crystals to me. Here was the Secretary of Health and Human Services talking about how he can tell by how people walk whether they have a mitochondrial disorder, which he's not even he's a lawyer.
Primarily because I came from a big family. I have 7 kids. I had 11 brothers and sisters. I had about 70 first cousins, and I never saw anybody with diabetes. I never knew anybody with a food allergy. I never knew anybody with autism. When I was a kid, and I know what a healthy child is supposed to look like. I'm looking at kids as I walk through the airports today, as I walk down the street, and I see these kids that are just overburdened with mitochondrial challenges, with inflammation. You can tell from their faces, from their body movements, and from their lack of social connection. And I know that that's not how our children are supposed to look.
Well, I mean, we know that there are a lot of young people, particularly, who have childhood diabetes because of obesity. We know that. But my grandpa had diabetes, and he was my grandpa, meaning like he was, about the same age as Bobby. He's older than Bobby Kennedy. The notion that autism rates are on the rise as a result of some form of vaccination, which has been a sort of thing that Kennedy's been pushing for a long time. The evidence to back that is scanty to nil. The reality is that autism diagnosis has increased because the spectrum of autism diagnosis is much broader now. So if you go back before 1980, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders called autism schizophrenic reaction childhood type and then referred to it as schizophrenia childhood type until 1980. And that's when the diagnosis changed to infantile autism. And the criteria at that point were focused on external symptoms like delays in language development, resistance to change, and attachment to objects. And then in 1987, they widened the criteria. So if you keep widening the criteria over and over and over, you end up with a bunch of people who are diagnosed with autism. Okay, that is the actual reason why you've seen an increase in the diagnosis. In 1994, Asperger's disorder appeared in the DSM, but then it was moved into autism spectrum disorder in the DSM's 5th edition. So they kept broadening out the definition over and over. Now, you can say there's overdiagnosis, but that is certainly a major piece of the puzzle when it comes to why so many people are being diagnosed with autism. Is that better diagnosis? It could be theoretically worse diagnosis. People who are effectively borderline normal being diagnosed with something. And this happens to be a thing that the medical community does do, which is they look for a label for everything. And if you don't have a label, just toss it in the autism basket, for example, or the ADHD basket. Okay, with that said, I'm not sure that diagnosis by sight of mitochondrial disorders is probably the way to do this. This is coming to a head now because RFK Jr. has decided to fire the director of the CDC. Her name is Susan Menares. She is refusing to leave her post. The clash between RFK Jr. and Menares, who was sworn in 1 month ago, burst into public view as 4 other high-ranking CDC officials quit, apparently in frustration over vaccine policy. Now, again, not all those people are great. One of the people we pointed out is a person who is very focused on trans medicine at the CDC. So good luck to that person. But one of the reasons this broke out into the open is apparently because Menares had been under fire from RFK Jr. based on her resistance to his vaccine policy, which is relatively anti-vaccine, more broadly speaking. Menares called Senator Bill Cassidy, who's a doctor, and who had been very on the fence about voting for the confirmation of RFK Jr. And then he called Kennedy. And then Kennedy apparently summoned Menares to a second meeting and accused her of being a leaker and told her that she would be fired. Apparently, Menares spoke to other senators as well. On Wednesday, a White House official told Menares if she did not resign by the end of the day, that President Trump would fire her. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, here's a not-so-fun fact. Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, Paramount Plus, they're all raising their prices yet again. You may have noticed. And then there's Daily Wire Plus doing what we love to do, the exact opposite. We are not raising prices. We are dropping them. Right now, you can grab an annual Daily Wire Plus membership for 40% off with code SUMMER. That unlocks everything we've got, including the new episode of The Pope and the Fuhrer, the secret Vatican files of World War II. On September 8th, you'll be the first to watch the Isabel Brown Show. Plus, you'll get exclusive first looks at our brand new flagship show, Friendly Fire, where the entire Daily Wire crew goes head-to-head, live, uncensored, and unfiltered. Go to dailywireplus.com right now. Lock in 40% off your annual membership before the deal is gone. Yeah, again, we'll have to see what the outcome of all this is. If we have a healthier America, then great. But that healthier America does have to be based in data. I'm open to the possibility that it's environmental factors that are causing an uptick in autism. I'm certainly open to the idea that what we eat in the United States is worse for you than it is in other countries. I'm very much open to that, and I think there's pretty good evidence to suggest that. But if we could stick to the data, that would certainly be welcome. That's the promise that RFK Jr. made when he testified for his confirmation. And meanwhile, other elements in the administration running up against some resistance. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, tried to obtain an indictment against Sandwich Man. You remember Sandwich Man? That was that dude who threw like a girl and tossed a hoagie at an ICE agent and then got himself arrested. Well, apparently, Pam Bondi was unable to obtain an indictment against this person. According to the New York Times, the grand jury's rejection of a felony charge was a remarkable failure by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, and the second time in recent days a majority of grand jurors refused to vote to indict a person accused of felony assault on a federal agent. So, presumably, this is because you got a grand jury in D.C. Some of the members of the grand jury in D.C. were like, I can't. The famous joke about a grand jury is you can get somebody indicted over a ham sandwich. Apparently not over a hoagie if it's a grand jury in Washington, D.C. It remained unclear if prosecutors plan to try again to obtain an indictment against this person, a former DOJ paralegal. They could forego seeking felony charges and refile his case as a misdemeanor. That doesn't require an indictment to move forward. I mean, trying to charge as a felony is probably an overcharge. The lawyer for the defendant refused to comment on all this. The defendant, his name is Sean Dunn here. Again, hit the guy with a misdemeanor. Hit the guy with the sandwich. And I don't think that really amounts to felony assault. Didn't take a bat and hit him or something. But again, not an amazing look for the DOJ. However, we do have new information on the John Bolton investigation. So, as I said, when the John Bolton investigation broke, I don't know what's happening here. To the outside, it looks not great because if you have the administration targeting political opponents, that's wrong. However, it may very well be that there was classified information that ended up in the hands of the wrong people. And if that's the case, then prosecution is warranted. Well, now we have some new details. According to Fox News, the FBI's raid on John Bolton's home and office is tied to an investigation that reaches beyond his controversial book. Now, remember, he wrote a book called The Room Where It Happened about his time in the Trump administration. The allegation by the Trump White House at the time, in Trump 1, was that he had used classified information. They opened an investigation. The Biden White House then proceeded to shut down that investigation, claiming that it was really for political reasons that he'd been investigated in the first place. And so the speculation was this was a reopening of an old investigation. It turns out that maybe not. The scope of any potential charges against Bolton is uncertain. Experts tend to agree Bolton does have some legal exposure. Prominent D.C.-based attorney Mark Zaid, who specializes in national security, said while there are many unknowns about the DOJ's investigation into Bolton, his memoir could be an area of vulnerability for him, obviously. There are some reports that actual intelligence agencies have gotten hold of information that Bolton had. This is according to the New York Times. The United States, according to the New York Times, gathered data from an adversarial country's spy service, including emails with sensitive information that Bolton appeared to have sent to people close to him on an unclassified system. So that sounds more legit. That sounds more like they're investigating Bolton because he was using unclassified methods of distributing classified information, and actually adversarial countries got a hold of it. Now, again, is that going to be fully prosecuted? It seems more like the Hillary Clinton case than anything else. And so if he had classified information that was transmitted over non-secure channels and it ended up being hacked, it depends if you use the actual legal standard whereby he could be indicted, or you use the Comey standard for Hillary, in which case probably not, because he didn't have intent to distribute it to an adversarial enemy. The new details of the case, according to the New York Times, again, not a newspaper friendly to Trump, present a more complex chain of events. The disclosures suggest a long-running investigation into Bolton's activities changed over time, with some of the issues echoing past inquiries into the handling of national security secrets. The emails in question, according to the People, were sent by Bolton and included information that appeared to derive from classified documents he had seen while he was national security advisor. Bolton apparently sent the messages to people close to him who were helping him gather material that he would ultimately use in that memoir. So he has obtained certain lawyers like Abby Lowell, who's represented a wide variety of sort of high-profile people who have come under scrutiny from the federal government, including everyone from Hunter Biden to Letitia James and Lisa Cook. No charges have yet been filed, but at the very least, it's a more complex case than it originally seemed. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members. Right now, we'll get into that latest NVIDIA revenue report. What does that mean for the future of the markets? Plus, GDP was actually revised up last quarter. Looking not bad. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.